everybody to the June 11th, 2020 Public Works Committee meeting, virtual Zoom meeting. Shelley, can we have a roll call, please?
Chairman Lockmiller?
Here.
Alderman Leahy?
Here.
Alderwoman Tice?
Here.
And Alderman Weggie?
Here.
All present.
Thank you. Move on to approval of the agenda. Any changes to the agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that I think we have a lot of public comment tonight about the chicken ordinance. So I'd like to make a motion to put an item to discuss the chicken ordinance in new business.
Okay, so we'll add discussion on the chicken ordinance, the new business. I think that'd be item B under new business. I think we just have one item. And then I see that we're still processing the minutes from the March meeting under the consent agenda. So there will not be anything under the consent agenda. Can we approve the amended agenda per acclamation? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right. We have no announcements, appointments, or proclamations. We'll now move on to citizen comment. You'll have, if you could state your name, address, and you'll be given 3 minutes to any item that or any concerns that you have. Shelley, do we have any emails or any participants?
Yes, Reagan Beard is raising her hand.
Okay.
Hi there.
Hi, Reagan. Go
Can
ahead.
you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you,
me?
Reagan. Could you
Okay.
state your name and address?
Yes.
You got 3 minutes.
Okay. My name is Reagan Beard Kurt. I live at 8730 Bridgeport Avenue. I believe some of you have been forwarded an email from Brandon that that is from me. Just to give you a little background, I'm new to Brentwood. We moved here in August of 2019. And we've owned chickens for going on 6 years. I'm very passionate about chickens. I donate and volunteer with the Brentwood High School Chicken Program. Upon moving here, I spoke with the inspector prior to even buying our new coop or moving our chickens to our home because I wanted to make sure that we were in compliance. We're good people. We love our chickens. We take really good care of them, and we have a beautiful coop. Beginning in May, I started receiving phone calls from the inspector that we were in violation of the ordinance because we were letting our chickens out of our coop and into our fenced-in yard. This is not something that I was aware of when I applied for the permit. I not only wholeheartedly disagree with this rule, I question as to whether the ordinance is being enforced as it was intended. I've connected with a ton of chicken owners here in Brentwood, and the consensus is that everyone lets their chickens out safely in their enclosed backyards to peck around. There's some that didn't even know that they were doing anything wrong. I also connected with a resident who was partially responsible for getting the ordinance here in the first place. She firmly believes that that was never the intention of the ordinance. She also reiterated to me today when I spoke to her that it was never mentioned that they couldn't because it was kind of already an assumption that they could. I also have done a ton of research into other municipalities that are surrounding Brentwood that do very clearly state that chickens can peck about the yard. Glendale, Maplewood, Clayton are some of them. I could speak for 2 hours about the benefits of being able to free range your chickens safely. I won't bore you with that, and I know that I don't have that much time, but they are endless for the homeowners, but specifically for the health of the chickens, which is something that I am very passionate about. So this is where I partnered with my alderman, Brandon, to find out if he could help or if this is something that we could change. And I'm begging you all to take a look at this ordinance and see if you all can see it from my side. I don't believe that this is humane treatment of our animals. I also don't think that it's fair that within my fenced-in backyard, where we're not hurting anyone, that we can't clean our coop or enjoy our chickens while we're out on our patio, or my 3-year-old neighbor who loves to come over and hold them and pet them and feed them treats, that we can't do that without fear of being photographed and reported. But most of all, I have a 10-year-old daughter whose life is totally involved in these chickens. She loves them so much. She has allergies, and we can't have a traditional cat or dog. So these girls they're part of our family, and they're our pets, and I don't believe that we're hurting anyone by having them safely in our yard. My opinion on the ordinance is that that the ordinance states that you can lose your permit if the chickens are getting out and onto others' private property and onto the public right away. But if they are safely enclosed in a yard, they're not doing any harm. So I'm begging you, please take a look, and I hope that you can help.
All right. Thank you, Reagan.
Thanks.
Alderman Lockmiller, you have Tom McGee.
All right, Tom, go ahead.
Yes, I live at 8734 Bridgeport and deal with it on the other side that looking at the ordinances, they clearly states they're to remain inside the pen. Talk to Steve and Clayton constantly because as the ordinance describes, there's size of the pen and all that states that they should be in the pen and cleaned up after. It's trying to still maintain neighborly interactions, but I hold a contract with the city as far as nuisance cleanups and that, and felt obligated to report the nuisance violation, which is why I reached out to Steve and Clayton to begin with.
Okay. Is that it, Tom?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. Shelley, is this Dave Spencer?
David Spencer, yes.
Go
Yeah.
ahead, David.
Okay, thanks. I'm Dave Spencer. I live at 2509 Cecilia, and I just want to make a comment supporting Ms. Beard-Kurt's her comment just about the current interpretation of the ordinance. So I've lived in Brentwood for 10 years. I've had chickens for probably 7 or 8 of those years. First on Eulalie, and then now on Cecilia. And just to kind of give you a frame of reference, I mean, the chickens are in their coop like 90% of their time. They're let out on occasion to peck around, as was mentioned, usually under supervision, or when the coop is being cleaned. They never range very far. They've gotten to the front yard maybe just a handful of times. And if they were left to their own devices, they would, always go back into their coop at nightfall, which has happened occasionally if we've kind of forgotten that they're pecking around in the backyard. During this time, when we've let them range around occasionally, they've never caused any nuisance whatsoever. They've never gone too far. We've never had any complaints. They've rarely gone off of our property, and they usually just stay pretty close to home. We think it's nice to let them scratch around. They eat bugs and grass and whatnot, and they kind of just mind their own business generally, and really don't cause much trouble. I would say, as far as the potential for causing any nuisance at all for hens is really far less than other animals people might have in their backyard. The one thing that can happen is they can be rather loud occasionally. The occasional chicken can be loud, which is a problem that's not unique to chickens and is rare among chickens in general. And is not necessarily dependent on whether they're in or out of their enclosure. In fact, it can even be alleviated by letting them out of their enclosure. That's about all I have to say. I think, in the time we've been here for 10 years, had chickens for 8, never had an issue, and we've let them out routinely. And as Ms. Beard-Kurt said, other people do as well. One final comment is we live on Cecilia, and if any of you have been around, there are 4 domesticated ducks that roam around the entire neighborhood. I don't know whose they are, but they certainly have free range of not just their property, but I would say, many square blocks of our neighborhood. And they're, enjoyed, and nobody's ever complained about them.
Good.
That's my comment.
Thank you, David. Is this Jessica White? Is she up next, Shelley?
Yes.
Jessica?
Yes. Hi, I'm Jessica White. I live at 8641 Litzinger Road, and I just wanted to agree 100% with Reagan and Dave. We also let our chickens out. It's healthy for them. They also are our pets. They are beloved by our children. There's hawks in the area, so we always have somebody out there with the chickens, and we have a fenced-in backyard, and they stay really close to whoever's out there because they like to stay with their flock. When I lived on Urban Drive, there was a pit bull next door that would regularly jump into my fenced-in backyard, and that was a nuisance. And I feel like if people can have a pit bull wander their fenced-in backyard, then why not chickens? And so I just wanted to say, thanks for listening, and I agree with Reagan and Dave. Chicken owners who love their chickens, let them out to get bugs and to roam around their yard. It's healthy for them, and it's really not a nuisance at all.
All right. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you.
Shelley, anybody else?
Have any other hands up? There's a caller, start 618.
Yep, this is Derek. I'm with TWM.
Okay.
Just here. Yeah.
All right. Andy?
All right, hang on, Derek. We'll get to you.
Oh.
If that's it, I invite everybody to stick around. Brandon has this on our agenda at the end, towards the end of the meeting. Or you can watch us on YouTube later, or email your alderman with any other issues you might have along these lines. So I'll close citizen comment if there's nobody else, Shelley.
I have Jessica White. Her hand's still up, but I don't know if she had an additional comment.
No, she just spoke. There she goes.
Okay.
Hi, this is Angie Holshaw. I'm sorry.
Oh.
I didn't know how to do the hand raising.
That's
and
okay.
really good to do stuff. I just wanted to real quick just jump in and say that I'm the person who originally back in 2013 really fought for my chickens. I had them for 3 years before I even knew that we couldn't have them. And yeah, I mean, I agree with what everybody else is saying. It doesn't make sense if you can have a dog in your backyard, a barking dog, and you are a responsible chicken owner and you have a enclosed safe yard, it wouldn't make sense that they wouldn't be allowed to free roam and eat bugs and do their thing. They're happiest and healthiest that way. The idea that the ordinance actually says that they're supposed to be locked in the coop, I don't see that. I don't understand what that would even mean. What the ordinance is saying is basically for their safety and protection for people who don't take into consideration that they should be able to free range. That's the minimum space they need, that it's like required by law. I think that's kind of what the whole dimension thing is all about, like how to give them enough space to, be happy and healthy if they have to be cooped up.
Water.
Yeah, so that's pretty much all that I have to say. It's shocking to me that somebody would have a problem with chickens in the backyard. It just doesn't even make any sense, but that's just my opinion.
Thank you, Angie.
Thank you.
I see that we have Rachel.
Hi, yes. My name is Rachel Beard-Curran. I live at 8733 Bridgeport Avenue. I don't have chickens, but I guess my only suggestion of another way to kind of think about it is if the chickens are cooped up in their coop and they're naturally going to be louder than because they're bored and they're cooped up, animals need space to roam and move. That's why we let our dogs out in the backyard. But if the chickens are having to be cooped up because the only time that they can get out is to have their coop cleaned, you're going to have a double problem, because then you're going to have chickens that are noisy, and then you've got chicken owners that can't win if they can't let them out because of the ordinance, but then they keep them in and they're noisy, and then they get bounced for the ordinance. Like, it's basically made a catch-22 where nobody can win.
Okay. Thank you, Rachel. Anybody else? Shelley, do you see anybody else?
I do not.
All right. Well, then I'll try to close citizen comment and move on to report to committee chair and alderman. I have no report. Andy, anything?
No report.
Nancy?
No report.
Brandon?
No report.
All right. City administrator report. Bola, anything?
No report, thank you.
All right, we'll move on to department reports. We'll start with Public Works. And Dan, I think you have a couple updates. You're muted, Dan.
Oh, I know why.
There you go.
Okay, back again. Can you hear now?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Two simple, well, one simple and one not as simple updates regarding Brentwood Forest. You know, we talked about them doing something different than the current situation as far as trash collection. Currently, they still use bags on Mondays and Thursdays when they leave their trash. I know they, as a board, they're speaking with St. Louis County Department of Public Health. It looks like they're going to go towards using carts of some sort, but they need to figure out where and how many of those carts they need to go with as far as storage, so that they can maintain their own bylaws as far as where they can store them. You know, they can't be out in the visible public in front of those buildings. So that's the challenge that they're facing, is how many to get, where to put them, and be able to comply with the county's ordinance, which is to keep it in some sort of more permanent container than a plastic bag. So don't really have anything else to add to that, unless you have any questions you want me to ask them.
Anybody questions? Andy, I see your hand up. You're muted.
Get there. Dan, have the Brentwood Forest looked or discussed about putting a container in at different coves to collect and do it as a commercial arrangement versus putting it at the corners?
They talked about it, but I don't believe that they have the funds for it. So the cheaper solution was to have each property owner purchase their own cart and store that somewhere. If they do it themselves, then they need to be able to fund either a dumpster or several carts, you know, of various sizes. And they were wanting to shift that burden to the owners themselves.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dan.
Yep.
I guess move on to your second item.
Yeah, second item, we were asked to take a look at the yard waste reduction, or a possible yard waste reduction. I know I gave you a bunch of information in your packet. So there's actually a graph that I started looking at just to see if there were patterns, and you can kind of see that there is, in the sense that we have lower quantities in cubic yards that we collect in the winter months. So like January, February, we're typically like in the 100 cubic yard or so for the total each of those months for that 5 years worth of data that I graphed. So from 2015 through 2019, it's fairly low. Then you can kind of see it spikes up in March, April, May. And then in the summer months, it usually goes down a little bit, like June, July, August, September, and even a little bit in October. But then you see a big spike in November, December. So the idea was to take a look and see where maybe we could possibly reduce the service down. But I also looked at other communities too and what they do. So the ones that still haul, the larger ones that still haul would be Kirkwood and University City. So you can see What they do would be they have either yard waste stickers. You can go with a yard waste bag. We don't require the stickers. You can put it in a bag, and then of course we haul the bag away, or you can use a receptacle and we'll empty the receptacle as long as it's dedicated for yard waste. But they charge for those services and we don't. And then they also put together a chart to kind of figure out, well, what would the potential savings be? So I looked at labor, fuel, and also the reduction that we're charged. St. Louis Composting is where we haul everything right now. It's out in Valley Park. So if we weren't charged as much, say it's a fourth, we basically would only collect one time in January, one time in February, and then resume back to weekly March through the rest of the year. It looked like we could save a few $1,000s. The rough analysis shows anywhere from $2,700 to $2,900. So just under $3,000 a month if you were to entertain that. Like I said, the other communities do offer weekly pickups. And then there's also the one that's a little bit off would be University City. They actually will vacuum it if you put the leaves in the tree lawn, and then there's no bag required, but we don't have equipment to do that. That's basically like you just put it in a furrow and then somebody picks it up. We don't have the vacuum or any of that type of equipment to pick that up like they do. So, currently, again, we just go with either a receptacle or a yard waste bag. The question really becomes, do you want to consider paring it down or leave it as is, or some other variation? So, we could charge if we wanted to try to recover some of that, or we just keep it as is. It's really up to the committee.
Any questions for Dan? No. So if we, even in those months of January and February, you're looking at 125 cubic yards. How many trucks are you running that day? If you can only get 25 cubic yards per truck, that's 5 trips to dump that, right? If we went to
Roughly, yes, if you can compact it.
Are you usually running one truck or all of them for that yard waste?
In the winter months, it's typically 2 trucks. In the higher peak months, it's all 3. Like right now, it's all 3.
Okay.
So there might be a little bit more savings with that 3rd truck being idled in the January, February.
So we're only talking about $5,600 in savings by going to once a month in January and February.
Right. And the reason why I didn't want to pare it down during some of the higher months is because I think people will just hang on to it until we do collect it. And then there's going to be way more on the weeks that we do collect. So we're just going to wind up spending the money anyhow. We're going to make more trips and stay longer, or have to throw more resources at it with other public works staff.
Okay. Well, Dan had listed several recommendations. Does anybody want to take up any of those recommendations? Dan, I think you got your answer.
Okay.
I appreciate all the work and time you put into this.
Oh, no problem.
Made it simple even for a 3rd grader to figure out. So thanks.
No problem.
All right, we'll move on to Parks and Rec Department. Eric, you got some updates for us?
Yeah, I just have two quick updates for you guys. The first is Summer Beats, which was formerly Music on the Menu. We were asked to see if we could do that virtually this month or moving forward, and we ran into some problems. Basically, a couple of things. One is that you can't live stream copyrighted music per Facebook regulations. We could try it, knowing that we're breaking their rules and regulations, but a lot of time they'll come on and they'll just stop the live feed. So we could start it, and 5 minutes into the concert, they could turn it off, and we'd be kind of out of luck. The second is also we looked into a FM transmitter, see if we could broadcast it through FM across the entire city. But there's those pesky FCC regulations. Basically, you can do it very low, about 1,000 feet, which is what we might be doing for the drive-in movie night that we're going to bring up. But you can't really do it across the entire city. So the final kind of nail in the coffin was when we heard from the band that they would be unavailable this month. We just heard that last week. We did quickly try looking at some alternate bands, but they're 75 to 90% more expensive than what we had. So our plan, what we decided, was to cancel this month, and then hopefully either St. Louis County will loosen the restrictions to have more than 10 people, or we'll find a better virtual option moving forward.
Okay.
That's the first update. Any questions on that one?
All right.
Then the second is the dockless small vehicle program. We just added that in there the other day. The city of Clayton contacted Brentwood, Richmond Heights, and Maplewood about our dockless vehicle program, which was approved March of last year. All the cities decided it would be beneficial to have the city of Clayton involved in the program. So we're updating the agreement and bringing it to the Board of Aldermen meeting on Monday.
See no hands up, so thank you, Eric.
No problem.
We'll move on to item C, which is the Planning and Development Department. Lisa, you've got a couple items there. You're muted. Here you go.
My apologies. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to give a very brief report on a goal that is actually included in the Planning and Development Department's budget or visioning for 2020. And the goal of our department is to promote economic development opportunities within the city of Brentwood. And one of the objectives of that goal is to encourage or to foster the creation of an eco-friendly environment for present and future generations, focused on green living practices, including the use of solar energy. I know that this committee has addressed the use of solar energy by both residents and businesses in the past. And I just wanted to again give you a very brief report, but the staff has started to look at the use of solar energy by both residents and businesses. I just wanted to again start out by saying our current codes, they allow, both zoning and the building codes does allow the use of solar energy here in Brentwood, but we are looking through all of our code requirements to see if there's a way that again that we could encourage more use of it. So one of the code requirements that we have currently is that, for instance, residential properties, if they want to put solar array on top of their homes and so forth, that is a required improvement that must go through the Architectural Review Board for review before they can submit a building permit and get their building permit and so forth. So we are looking at maybe how we could go ahead and exempt the installation of solar from the ARB review. In terms of other green practices, another thing that has come up in the past, especially with some of the older neighborhoods that kind of have more of the homes that were built in the 1930s and 40s, there are still, if you probably looked around, there's some driveways to some of these single family residents that still have actually just kind of a grass driveway with the two concrete strips that used to be more common back in the day. Well, our current code would say that that has to be replaced now with a paved surface driveway. So that might be something else that we want to consider to be more green, is to still allow that instead of having them have to tear that out and then include all of that pervious surface and make that improvement. So again, there's just things that we're starting to just kind of go through all the building and zoning codes and trying to see how we could maybe look at really encouraging the use of solar. And so I don't really have anything else more. I don't have any recommendations at this time. Obviously, no action from the committee tonight, but I just wanted to say that we have started that effort.
Okay. Brandon, you have a question?
Yeah, no, I think that's great, Lisa. And, like on the permeable driveway, the technology has changed a lot. There's permeable asphalt, and that just seems like that would help mitigate our stormwater issues if we did allow residents to do different things. I'm not talking about the two strips of concrete and grass. That may not be the answer, but there's new technology, and I think we should be letting people do it. So appreciate you doing that. I think that'll be good.
And I'm also pretty excited about when we adopted the Manchester Corridor Commercial Zoning District. If you recall, of course, you're the ones that all adopted that last spring, but there were a lot of really good requirements in there for more things that deal with sustainability. And so what we had thought about when we wrote the Manchester Corridor Commercial District, of now maybe looking at how that could be applied in other zoning districts, primarily probably our planned development. So that's another thing that we're looking is how do we take some of the information that we just more recently went through to encourage some of these activities and put them in our other existing commercial districts. So don't have a time schedule really on any of this yet, but just wanted to tell you that we're definitely interested in this and making some progress.
Great. You had a second item regarding an RFQ on on-call engineering services?
I did, and this also relates to a report that will be given by Christie Wilson tonight on the stormwater management efforts that the city has been working on. And I wanted to let you know that a piece of this program is going to be if we require under this new ordinance the stormwater infill development permits. We've talked about in the past how we would have an engineer that would be looking at the permits and so forth and approving them. So I know that we need to kind of get that in place if we implement the ordinance. So the progress that we made was over the last couple months or so, we had solicited the RFQ for the on-call for engineering services for stormwater management, which would include the review of these permits that we're thinking of imposing. And we've got, I think, 6 submittals, and they're all decent submittals. Actually, the evaluation team, which will consist again of myself and Dan and Eric, we've met, and we've got some really good firms that submitted proposals. So we're looking at scheduling an interview to discuss the proposals with a few of the firms next week. And again, what we want to do is really just package all this together for the Public Works Committee at the July meeting. So I would expect that we will also have a recommendation of possibly a firm or firms we would like to consider for the review of the stormwater infill development permits. So all that's going to be forthcoming at the July meeting.
Okay. Nancy, you have a question?
I do have a question. So Lisa, are you talking to these different companies about the timeliness of their review and how much this would slow down homeowners from getting appropriate permits?
Yes, if they haven't stated that in their RFQ, we're certainly going to, the ones that we've shortlisted to will address that. The ones that have went ahead and made that part of their proposal, it seems like they're talking about for smaller projects, like for the residential that we're talking about, the time seems to be about 1 week. But if it's going to be for one of those commercial projects that doesn't fall under MSD's category to begin with, and it would be a more sizable commercial project, you might be talking about a 2-week review in that case.
That's great. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, Lisa, thanks for the update. Move on to consent agenda. We have nothing. Move on to old business. And Lisa, I guess you're back with the RFQ for the landscape architect services from last month's meeting with some additional information.
Right, I think, again, we had brought to the committee at last month a recommendation to have staff maybe move forward with negotiating contracts actually for 2 firms, Christner Group and also Planning Design Studio. I know there was some discussion at the last meeting that included a little bit more of well, just I guess more inquisitive in terms of how we formatted the RFQ, how we do the evaluation. And one of the things also is, of course, when we run into situations where we've worked with these firms in the past, you know, how does that play into our evaluation? And, you know, does it give them an edge or, you know, a bias or something to that nature? So anyway, we went ahead and we updated the memo from the last Public Works Committee meeting. But I think the things that we wanted to point out is that staff still is coming to the committee with the same recommendation, which is to consider hiring both groups on retainer. And for the reasons still we stated at the last meeting. But I think what we wanted to point out to try to address maybe some of the concerns, if that's what the committee members had, was that we do think that the process is fair and it is impartial. And when we look at how we structured the RFQ to begin with, we have to follow Chapter 135, which is our purchasing code. And so what we included in the report really is what it says, that section of the code, in terms of the selection of professional services. And, you know, one of the things that a factor that it even has in part of the initial screening is to consider the quality of work that was previously performed by the firm for the city. So I think that definitely is a criteria or factor that staff or whoever evaluates these firms should continue to use. But again, how do you make sure that it doesn't play out and maybe any kind of bias? So one thing we do when we prepare the RFQ, we also have our city attorney review it, so that if there is something there that we're not seeing as the composers of that RFQ, that maybe he could point those things out. So it does go through that test, if you will, with the city attorney. But then also to eliminate any bias in that manner, we also, when it came to the criteria that we use, but then also kind of the rating, in order to determine who we might like to go ahead and bring in for interviews, we actually have removed any kind of point value associated with their previous work with the city. So even though it's considered in the initial screening, we have taken it out of the point value that's established for who then we shortlist and ultimately might have come in and talk about their proposals. So I just wanted to make those couple of points this evening. You know, hopefully maybe it's a better understanding that's been provided to the committee of how we do things. But as I said, it hasn't really changed the city or the staff's recommendations. We're still asking this evening to move forward with both negotiating Christner and Planning Design Studio to provide these on-call landscaping services for the city.
Any questions for Lisa? Brandon?
Yeah, I really do appreciate the clarification of the process and you're talking about it. So, you know, I do think there's maybe an opportunity to continue that discussion on how we pick that, you know, and eliminate inherent bias. It's just the human nature sometimes. So, but I do appreciate the additional information and everything that was sent over. So, you know, I'll have that conversation with, you know, Ways and Means ongoing, but not a hold up here. So thanks for that.
You're welcome.
Andy? You're muted, Andy.
We'll make the motion to move to the full board to negotiate a contract with both Planning Design Studios and Christner
I'll
for
second.
on-cons officers.
All right, Andy's made the motion, Nancy seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, onto the board. All right, let me go through my papers. Eric, I guess we have the survey services through TWM, and I believe you have Derek with you also.
Yes, Derek with TWN's on the line just in case we have technical questions that Lisa, Dan, or myself can't answer. So there's probably to hear from all four of us at some point during this time.
How do you want to just take each area and then take on the recommendation you have?
That was going to be my suggestion, is that I'll just stop after each area and then we can ask questions and move forward if there's no questions.
Sounds good.
Just as a reminder, we've been working on this for a few months. We gave a brief update last month, but we are to the point where TWM's ready, has done their preliminary work, all their property research boundary work already, and has presented us with the plat surveys, which was in the packet. So to go by each one, the first is Area A, which is Rogers Parkway. There's really no question about ownership in this area. The work was really to confirm boundary surveys and encroachments. We've listed the encroachments there. There's been discussion about using that area, especially Rogers Parkway, in the future for different projects, expanding the Greenway being the most one that's been talked about. So we think it would be beneficial to complete the topographical survey of this area. So that's our recommendation for this area.
What does the topo get you that you need to see, Eric?
The topo, and Dan and Derek can help me out with this one a little bit more because engineers are a little bit better. But the topographical will basically get you the points of all the area and give you kind of the elevations and things like that. It's kind of the first step of the design, is making sure you have all the topo ready to go. And the nice thing about what we could do at TWM is they put it in a file for us that we could, a shake file that then whoever's working with us could then take the shake file, put it right into what they're doing, and all the points, the data points will already be there for them.
Okay. Andy?
Are they looking at doing a GPS positioning topo, or are they looking at doing a electronic measuring arrangement? How are we offering to do the topo map?
So I don't know if Dan or Derek want to help with this one, but it is a LiDAR topographic survey. And so, which basically gets, it does use GPS, and it does use all the survey points that have been found. I don't know, again, Dan or Derek, if you want to expand on that for me, or if that's pretty much it.
Derek, are you available?
Let me, yeah.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. So we will utilize GPS just to get it referenced to the Missouri State Plane Coordinate System. But because of the tree canopy in that area, GPS isn't great. So one of the things we proposed to do in this area to minimize the impact on the residents was we have a mobile LiDAR unit. So we will mount that on our vehicle, and we will drive that quickly to collect the data. And we, because of the canopy, we'll use wheel sensors so that when the GPS loses its signal, we can monitor how far the vehicle's traveled. There will need to be some boots on the ground, but we thought that this approach would minimize the just the impact that it had on local residents, and hopefully minimize the phone calls that the city gets.
Andy, go ahead.
Follow-up question. You cited 2 different encroachments in this area. Is it the intent of the city to do something with those encroachments and to try to correct them? Or are we just citing and making record that they are encroached?
I think at this point, we're citing and making record that they are encroached, just in case, as I said, as we move forward, there would be a need to, at least we have the information now.
Okay.
Eric, will this be useful later with the Great River Greenway, if that continues on through from Brentwood?
And that's the main purpose of it. If we do continue that Greenway on, having this data already to put in place will speed up the process and should also make that process, the design process of that cheaper, since it's already done.
And the cost is $11,411. Is that down to the buck? Is that what we got?
Yes, not to exceed. So that was part of this. That was part of the contract.
All right. Well, Eric's looking for a motion. Andy?
Is that cost in the 20 budget, or the
yes,
or just so we haven't exceeded a budget item?
Not at all.
Okay.
Brandon?
What if we decided not to do the topographical right now? I mean, it sounds like a pretty easy setup to drive a vehicle over with LiDAR on top of it. You know, what would be the barrier to doing that just in time when we need it in the future? And the only reason I'm asking, and I'm not doubting the validity of it, just, you know, with the current situation we're in.
Sure, understand. The benefit of doing it now is that we do have TWN under contract, and we're guaranteed the price that we have. There is, you know, if we needed to wait, we could obviously contract with someone else at that time. And then do it at that time. So the benefit is the cost benefit of having it under this current contract.
Nancy?
How quickly do you anticipate trying to move the Great River Greenway to extend it up through Rogers Parkway? Is this like as we're doing Brentwood Bound, you're thinking in the next couple of years, or is this a 5 or 7 year away data that's going to sit for some time?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I'm a park guy, so I'd say we'll do it tomorrow, but you know, physically or economically, obviously that's not feasible. You know, it is in our capital budget to kind of look at it. It is a, you know, we do have a design for it already that I think was brought to Public Works last year at some point. And it's been a while, so we could re-engage with that design. But again, it is, you know, as things got delayed this year, that will get delayed further down the road. So I'd say, and my goal would be a 3 to 5. It could be 5 to 7 though.
Okay. Anybody want to entertain Eric a motion? Nancy?
It's not quite germane, but it's sort of to the exact topic of this. But my bigger question is, we picked a number of pathways, but are there other pathways in this, like I can think of one alley in the city that we haven't looked at. So are there ways we could spend this $11,000 that are investigating other similar pathway issues, like the same sort of shared use path
Sure.
problem that are more timely?
I'm
I'm not
assuming,
saying I'm against doing this study. I just, yeah.
I'm assuming we could work with TWM to do a addendum to the contract. And we could use that money for this type of thing. Definitely, we could easily do that if that would be the preference.
I mean, there's an alley along, on Park Ridge, sort of just a house north of Litzinger between Park Ridge and St. Clair, that has come up recently with some questionable driveway, and the city owns it and we don't know where it is. And I mean, that's just one in Ward 1. There may be others that weren't on the original list that need to be studied. And maybe this doesn't need to be studied now. I mean, that can certainly, it's been sitting since Brentwood was founded, so it could sit longer.
Andy, did you have something?
No, not at this time.
All right, well.
So go to Area B, which is the alleyway between Bridgeport and White. And then we also included the pathway from White down to Swicklum Blade. Again, we found a couple things in that one. Is that originally there was a 3-foot wide walkway and a 15-foot wide service alley in the original plat. The city did that 3-foot wide walkway, but that 15-foot service alley is still in effect. So it is still there. Find a number of encroachments. Pretty much most of the houses along that pathway encroach onto that 15-foot wide service alley. So if we're going to move forward with something, we'd either have to we're reducing the size of it or have work with each owner on those encroachments. Been out there, that alley is in very poor condition. It basically goes from somewhat of concrete to a really poor asphalt walkway. It's got the tree in the middle of it. So if we were going to keep maintaining this, we'd have to obviously make the path ADA accessible. We would have to remove the tree and those type of things. So we talked about it. Again, the staff, the cost of the tree removal, pathway replacement, and future upkeep, the staff thought it would be best to vacate the public use and see if any of the utilities wanted an easement in that area to get back to their property. Again, this change would affect Bridgeport Avenue primarily. There are 45 homes on Bridgeport, so that would be kind of the give and take of it. So that is Area B.
Brandon?
Yeah, this is, I would say, my top priority in Ward 2 in terms of safety and getting this fixed. I mean, I completely agree. It's kind of a disaster right now. You know, I would be in favor after talking to neighbors. You know, they sound open to working with us in a quick and efficient manner of whatever we need to do in terms of those encroachments. And I think that's an important path, because otherwise there's no way off of Bridgeport into the rest of the town. You'd have to walk all the way down the Brentwood Boulevard and back around. So I think that's an important cut through for a lot of people there. You know, I don't know if this is the motion I'm making or not, but if there's a way that we could keep the path and not cut down the tree, I went out and looked at it and I should have measured. You know, ADA compliance doesn't mean it has to be 5 feet wide everywhere, as long as there are, you know, 5 feet areas within a certain distance so it can turn around. So, you know, just curious what we could do. And we've got the dingo now, so maybe that's something we could do in-house in an efficient manner. I would be in favor of putting together a plan of what we could do to repair this path. So that'd be my motion. That's my long-winded motion.
Andy?
I'll second the motion.
Brandon, you say there's people interested in this cut through. How many people do you think use this path? I'm just curious. And how many citizens do you think, is it possible to get a petition to see how many people are in favor of this?
Considering the number of emails I get about the issue, there's already quite a population there, but all the kids on Bridgeport, and there's quite a few, especially right now, that's how they get to the pool, whenever that happens again, right? They cut through to White. That's how they get to Mark Twain. That is how they get everywhere, and just walking back to Brentwood doesn't seem to be
And Eric, are there easements you can get from a property owner to make instead of removal of the tree going around it? If they're open to it?
If they're open to it, we can, I'm sure Dan and I could go out and take a look at the pathway. It's been a little bit of time since I've been out there. I feel like the tree's right in the middle.
Right.
And so, depending on how much we have on either side, we might be able to get, a 5 or 6 foot pathway on one side or the other. If we do, though, as you tear that up, the bigger concern is as you tear that up and then put down a new pathway, is damaging the tree's root system and possibly killing it in itself. So I can also talk about that with the urban forester to get his opinion whether or not he thinks doing anything would damage that tree to the point where we would need to cut it down anyway. So, but I can get that information and bring it back to the next Public Works meeting, or just in a weekly report if that's easier.
Okay.
Great, thanks.
The one thing I did fail to mention was the pathway from Swim Club White down to Swim Club. And technically, it's not on an easement that we could find. If there is an easement, it's not recorded. So if we want to keep that pathway, we're going to need to do a little bit of work, because right now we're encroaching on the owner on White Avenue. So we just need to be careful of that and make sure we're able to move forward with that. So again, I think that's something that we could work with pretty easily.
Yeah, I also think that path is important. Again, getting the swim club, and do we have to do anything? Just keep it the way it is, and it's in great condition right now because I think we paved it a few years ago.
It's not ADA accessible, obviously, and so if we want to maintain ADA accessibility, we'd have to look at it a little bit more, and we could obviously do that the next time we resurface it or something. We just probably have to do some grading. But again, the bigger issue is just the fact that we're encroaching. The owner has obviously known that for a long time. I think the bigger issue is that if you have a change of ownership, and a new owner comes in and realizes that that's on their property, they might cause a little bit of a problem.
True. Yeah.
Okay. Andy, you have a question?
How long has this pathway been in existence? The city can't lose their right of ownership, but can the resident lose it if it's been in existence without contestment?
The first answer is it's been there a while, longer than I've been there. I do know when I first started, I know Jim Naaman was talking to me about how he actually was the one who installed that pathway. So I'm assuming it's when Jim Naaman was a laborer and not when he was the superintendent. So that even makes it even further back. So I'd 10 to 20 years easily.
Okay.
The secondary question is, if you want my legal opinion, you should not take any legal opinions from me. So I'd have to talk to Kevin about that.
Nancy? Or Andy, did you?
Oh.
Go ahead, Nancy.
I was going to say, I'll echo that is a really important path. I think a lot of people from Ward 1 who go to the pool, like they go straight across White. It's a much less traveled street than going to Litzinger and getting around. So that's a really important path for lots of people in Brentwood.
So do we need to vote on the motion on the Bridgeport, the White section, and then do we need a separate motion on the White to Swim Club Lane?
think the motions that I was putting in were monetary motions. The pathway from Bridgeport to White, it's technically is not in the budget this year. I think could Dan and I work and figure out what the cost of that would be and then bring that back. I think that would probably be the next step. So we know what we think the budgetary is going to be for that. And as far as the easement part is, if we need to work on getting the easement for that area, I'd look at Bull. I'm not sure if we need a motion for that.
Yes, we will. Unless that owner decides to donate it for $1. So we would need to be able to establish the value of that easement. And we have contracts with different companies. I'm sure it'll be under $2,000 so that you have money in your budget to pay for that. But we need a motion to direct us to do that.
Okay, so on the first one, we don't need a motion, but I would, it sounds like, but I would advise seeing what we can do to work that in-house. We got this awesome dingo that we can use all for that stuff. So time to get that baby out.
Yeah, it's been out. It's been out almost every day. So we're very happy with it. But that's something Dan and I can work with and work on together and figure that out for everyone.
And then on the second piece, I would make a motion that we approach the resident about a no-cost easement or a $1 easement. I think the residents, I haven't talked to that one specifically, but if they're aware of it and they're okay with it, maybe they're totally okay. And again, I think that's an important piece of their street too. They would probably be, or they might be okay. So it can't hurt to ask if we can just do a $1 easement transfer.
I'll second that.
Whatever the right words are there.
All right, so we've got direction to staff. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, Eric, you know where to go with that one.
Yep, thank you.
Items, Area C.
So Area C is Litzinger, or pathway from Cecilia Avenue down to Litzinger. There's not much discussion here. It is, basically it was, Litzinger used to go all the way down and connect from onto Litzinger and Rosalie. That part of Litzinger was vacated and a 5-foot sidewalk remained. So the city does own that, or there is a right of way for it. And there's a few encroachments, but right now, I think the idea is that we know that moving forward. The pathway's in good shape. And the only recommendation we had is that TWN couldn't find that jog on the right of way from 8528 to 8508 Douglas Court, but found monuments in the field. So if we wanted to, we could have TWM do some further title work to verify that ownership. Again, that is just if that's something the city thinks it would be a benefit to those residents.
You still got wide enough path without worrying about that jog?
Yeah. The pathway is not affected. It's just whether or not moving forward, it'd be more of a benefit to those residents than it would be for the city, to be honest.
Okay.
There's a 5-foot sidewalk dedication on the Manderley side, and the city owns the strip of land between 2829 and 2901 Hilldale. Now, TWM couldn't find any documentation on the width, but there is documentation on ownership, so I'm not sure what the width is. There is, again, some encroachments. The city encroaches on some things for the pathway. Some of the residents on Hilldale and Manderley encroach on that pathway as well. So it is kind of a lack of a better word for encroachments. The current condition is the asphalt path is on Manderley. It starts with stairs and then moves to a pathway that's in poor condition. And then secondarily, it then transitions to grass for Hilldale. Again, there's the amount of usage of it, but it is basically only 400 feet to the end of the street. So we feel like this would be a good one to vacate and to work with the two owners on Hilldale to remove the property. If we want to keep it, then we'll obviously have to do a lot of work to make it ADA accessible and to get the path in good condition.
Andy, I think you're familiar with this pathway.
Oh, yes. And At this point, let me advise the committee, this current pathway extends from Hilldale all the way over to Bremerton. Why we only looked going to the east of Manderley, I'm a little perplexed on to work with. The two property owners on the Manderley side, neither one of them care to take ownership of this strip of land because it doesn't do a thing for them. The owner on the Hilldale side, on the south side of the path, would be interested in picking up the 5-foot section and adding it to his property. I have not talked to the owner on the north side. They changed hands and I have never met or talked with them about it.
Does anybody ever use this, Andy?
The pathways that were established from Bremerton all the way up to Hilldale, when they laid out this section, the intent was to allow the school kids to walk through these pathways and get to the corner of Brentwood and Manchester without having to walk on a major streetway. I get a handful of people that use it on a daily basis, the kids, bicyclists or whatever, walking back and forth. Some of the neighbors that just do a loop, some days don't want to do a full loop, so they cut through the path to make it a shorter one. But yes, the pathway is used, and unfortunately it slopes because the property on the south side of the path actually sits much lower. And that's where your older citizens don't really like to use it because it's not stable footing.
Eric, you got a recommendation about trying to turn it over to utility easement. How does that work? Do we get paid for that? Do we have to maintain it still?
If it became a utility easement, we would not, it's my understanding that we would not need to maintain it at that point. The utilities would use it basically to get to the utilities that are around that area. Again, I don't know if, I think that'd be another question for legal if there's any other questions, but I believe that's correct. And Dan and Eric.
In this area, if I may, the utility line for the power company and the cable run up and down, north and south, through the backyards of the Manderley Hilldale connections. There is a street light right there where the path comes out. And I'm trying to think, I don't know, Eric, if the power line comes across the street to feed that light or if it comes from another location. I honestly don't look up that often.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
So I'm not sure the utilities would have a benefit in picking it up.
There is a 5-foot utility easement between Dale and Manderley, behind the homes.
Yes, running north and south.
Yeah. The real question is, would it be beneficial for them to have a vertical access or horizontal access that's vertical?
Worst you can ask them and see what they say.
All right.
For the other, I've never heard, I've never seen that pathway from Manderley all the way to Bremerton. I mean, that's obviously something we can look into as well.
If you would like to, this is where conflict of interest, if you want to call it, that property line adjoins my north side of my property. We disturbed both the Manderley side to the Lawndale side under the direction and with the knowledge of Jerry Wolf, who was the city inspector. When the neighbor to my north started to put in his driveway, he had to pour a retaining wall and stuff to support it. And the city allowed us to clean out the area between the two properties so that we could get in and build, what do you call it? Not the footings, the barriers, so that we could pour the concrete driveway, because it sits about 3 feet higher than my property. So we cleaned up that. My neighbor behind us, that area had been completely neglected. So the city gave us permission again to go in and bulldoze out that area and put a retaining wall in on her side to work with. I've talked with her. And I myself and my wife would be interested in picking up the 5-foot section and work it in if the city would like to abandon it. I did share it with Paula and Eric when I was doing the driveway, when I replaced my driveway, that this existed. And I also had conversations with Mayor Kelly and with Chrissie, Meyer when we were doing this work, and brought in the plat mapping from St. Louis County to show where this does exist. There is a survey marker in the 5-foot area that designates where that dimension starts, and it's sitting right at the edge of the telephone pole that's there for the street light.
Eric, would this be some type of an additional work order to run this whole pathway?
Yeah, we probably work with TWM on an order for this, if that's what we want to do.
Andy?
Well, I've got the copy of the St. Louis County map. It shows it clearly on there as to where this is and how to find it. And it runs for the Manderley to the Lawndale, and then you've got the same thing from Lawndale over to Bremerton. If you go to the county mapping sections, it's all there.
Well, I think we need to utilize TWM to document.
Do a little bit more research. It wouldn't hurt us.
Well, you want to make a motion to that effect?
So moved.
I'll second that. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay. All right. Area E.
Area E is Park Ridge connecting to Whitehall Court. Again, this gets we get a little bit easier here on out. So what we found is that there's a 5-foot sidewalk dedication, 6-foot easement, sorry, I was looking at the wrong thing, 6-foot easement on Park Ridge, from the area on Park Ridge. And then on Whitehall Court, there's a 10-foot private walkway dedicated to the owners of Whitehall Court only. So, I mean, there's even something that says that should be exclusive use and benefit of owners of lots of said subdivision and therefore be vested in the trustees. So there's an easement for basically half of it, which I think is in pretty good shape. It is kind of the connection for Ward 1 and Whitehall Court to get into that part of the other part of Ward 1. So our recommendation is just to continue to maintain the Park Ridge side of that pathway only.
Nancy?
So I have a question about, thank you for that. But interestingly, in the last month, I've had 2 different people approach me about that path, saying half is really well maintained and the other half isn't. The city's part is excellently maintained. But does the city need to reach out to the homeowners of Whitehall Court and let them know that the path isn't well maintained, or is that, I mean, does the city have any reason to reach out, or is it just theirs to maintain?
It is theirs to maintain. I'm assuming, and I'll look at BOLA, is that we'd probably talk to their trustees and ask them to do a better job. But as it is a private subdivision and that is a private walkway on that subdivision, I'm not sure how much leg they have to stand on if they continue to poorly maintain it.
And there are also complaints about water runoff onto the path. So all these issues from this meeting all came out in that path.
I understand.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so I guess we're going to follow Eric's recommendation to keep that path. All right.
So moved. Do you need that?
Yeah, please.
Motion to take the recommendation.
Yeah, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
No one opposed? All right, move on to F, Eric.
F is even simpler. It's the pathway from Yorkshire Lane connected to Southcote. Again, there's a pedestrian easement dedicated to York Village for the Yorkshire Lane part. So the Southcote part, sorry. And then a dedication to Yorkshire Lane trustees for the Yorkshire Lane Court section. So we don't have any ownership of either one of those pathways. So there's really nothing for us to be doing at this point. So we just confirmed ownership at that for this one.
Nancy?
I'll just comment that this is really helpful information because when people complain to me about the low part where the water sits, it's not the city's issue. So thank you for this, even though it came out like this, it's really helpful.
No problem at all.
Call the other guy. Item G.
That is the pathway connecting Mary Kay to Lewis. Again, there's a 6-foot walkway that was in the original plat. There's a couple encroachments, but they don't seem to be too big of a deal at this time. It is a aggregate pathway that's in fair condition. There are some trip hazards from where they're currently. It's not ADA accessible, but again, we would recommend continuing this pathway because it is kind of that connection over to Rosalie and to Swim Club and all that stuff, the Litzinger's pathway, and then work on accessibility and when it's replaced. We'll probably have a few years before we need to do that.
Brandon?
Motion to take that recommendation. No motorcycles allowed. Love that sign.
Somebody guys second that for me?
I'll second.
All right, Nancy, thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The last one is the apparent easement on Parkside. We're asked to look in to see if there's a easement that went from Parkside to Mount Calvary's land. And unfortunately, there was no ownership, so there's no encroachment. It's basically that area is owned by both those residents, so there's no pathway from Parkside to Calvary.
Okay. Is that it, Eric?
Yeah, the one last thing I put on there was there's a pathway from Yorkshire Lane Court to West Swan Circle. I know we've discussed this a few times. That was not part of TWM's scope because we had done the research on that. We do know it is owned by the owners at Yorkshire Lane Court. Again, as a reminder, we did speak to them a number of times about whether or not they give us an easement or sell part of their property. And at this time, they continue to say they're not interested in that. So we just added that as a little reminder. And then we do have $70,000 in the budget. So, we've only spent $44,000 so far. So we can work with TWM with those additions to the contract, and we should still be well under budget.
Okay. Great. Nancy?
So I'm back to the point I brought up with the alley that the city owns between Park Ridge and St. Clair. I guess I wasn't even aware that I always thought these people had a gravel driveway. Turns out it's owned by the city. I've been talking with Dan and Lisa about it over the last month. Are there any other paths in the city like that, like Andy brought one up earlier? There's this alley that I found. Are there other places that weren't looked at? Because I sort of like this weird alley that's partly paved and partly overgrown to be looked at. But were there lots? Did you limit to this, and how'd you get this list?
We limited this because these were the ones that we've been questioning and at some point or another had done maintenance on or had thought there's ownership issues on. There might be other ones out there, as you said. I'm not 100% sure of any additional ones. I do know if we do something else, there is the hill from Oak Tree Park up to the houses behind Melvin. And there's always been a question on who owns that area back there, going back to when I first started. That might be a good one to look at as well. But I could work with Dan and go through the city and see if there's any additional pathways like that. And whether it's I guess we need a motion, so I'd bring that back at the July Public Works meeting.
I would make a motion that you look at other city paths and bring a list back to us in July for us to evaluate whether those should be evaluated by TWM with an amended contract.
Brandon, second. Andy, did? Okay.
Yeah, in the past, when the city has done some work at property owners, I'm thinking along or when they bought the properties and then put it in the PNC Bank and stuff, that's when the developer comes in and says, oh, by the way, there is this easement, this right of way that's in here, or this pathway that nobody's ever done anything with. And then they ask the board, take a look at it, tell me if you'll vacate it so I can put my building in without having this thing running down the building. And that's how we've addressed it in the past. They've been coming to us because somebody else came up with a problem and then said, "Boy, what are you going to do?"
Okay. Thank you, Andy. All right. I guess all in favor of Nancy's motion, say aye.
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 All right. Anyone opposed? Thank you. And Derek, thank you for being here.
Yes, thanks for having me.
It was great work. Thank you. Thank you, Eric. All right.
Thank you.
Move on to item C. It's stormwater infill management. I guess that's you, Lisa.
Yes, so the committee has been helping staff over really the last several months since the beginning of the year, working on a new ordinance that would come up with some requirements for stormwater management for infill development. So the ordinance is basically done. If you recall though, where we've kind of left things is we were still kind of having discussions about when and how we were going to apply this ordinance, and more it was about when we would apply it in terms of what would trigger it. So would it be, what type of project would it be? Right now the ordinance states that any type of improvement that would result in greater than 200 square feet of impervious surface would require following the new ordinance. And part of this new ordinance then would be that the person making the improvements would have to obtain a stormwater infill development permit from the city, and that would be reviewed by a civil engineer. So earlier when I spoke under the report about we were going out for on-call engineering services to review the stormwater infill development permits, that's what it was in reference to. So tonight I think what we still really have to do is come up with the recommendation from this committee in terms of, again, of what threshold we're going to apply these new requirements. And I know it was also talked about at previous meetings. Some had suggested that maybe we'd only trigger it like if it was a project that would need to come in front of the architectural review board. And I did a little bit of just checking, if you will, for 2019, because most of the projects that would have passed ARB review in 2019 would have secured building permits by now. So I actually had an amount for construction costs for those types of projects. So if we just went for 1 year to say, well, how often would this new ordinance apply? There would have been 6 new homes last year, valued between $200,000 and $400,000 where this would apply. Then there were 6 other projects that were reviewed by ARB that would have had, they weren't new construction, new homes, but they were still greater than 200 square feet. They were projects like pool pavilions, front porches, detached garages, things of that nature. Those project costs ran between like $10,000 and $130,000. But again, there would have been 6 of those types of projects that went to ARB that would have required this permit. And then the last type of improvements would have been additions to single family homes. We have a lot of second story additions, so that wouldn't apply obviously, but for main floor additions, ground floor additions, there would have been 4 types of projects, and those had a value of $45,000 to $150,000. So I know some of the discussion in the past by the committee was that the way this new ordinance is structured and what we would require for the stormwater infill development permit would be the information that we would require for these types of ARB reviews. So again, there would have been a total of 14 projects in 2019. So along with that discussion tonight, if maybe we could then figure out what the recommendation will be from this committee, and then go ahead and, if need be, then amend the ordinance. The last part of this then would be to also come up with the best management practices manual. And a couple of months ago, the board went ahead and approved extending the contract with Horner and Shiffrin to help staff with that best practice manual. And so tonight, that's why I had invited Christie Wilson. She should be on the phone or on video here. And she was just going to give an update to the committee of where that component of this project stands. So if Christie's available.
Hello, Christie.
Available. Good evening, everyone. As Lisa said, we've been working on the BMP guidance document, and that's the Stormwater Best Management Practices that coincides with the infill development stormwater ordinance that's been presented. So within this guidance document, we've identified several technologies that homeowners, property owners, anybody looking to develop within the city of Brentwood can utilize to offset some of the stormwater that's generated as a result of increased impervious area for any home additions, new homes, things like that. So several of the technologies that are included in the guidance document are dry wells, bioswales, amended soils, vegetated filter strips. There's some modified French drains, permeable pavement, as Brandon mentioned earlier, rain gardens and rain barrels. So all of these are different technologies that can be utilized by the developer to kind of offset that. And the document also states, as we've included in the infill development ordinance, that the volume of stormwater be controlled to the 1.14 inches of rainfall that we've previously discussed. So within the document, we talk about the different technologies that are available. We provide some guidance as to the best locations for each type of technology, depending on your soil conditions, the slope of your yard, what works in certain places and what doesn't. We've also provided some sample calculations for sizing. And then there's also some tips for maintenance so that the developers can discuss with the property owner what type of maintenance would be required with each type of technology that's utilized. So all those things are included in the guidance document that'll help people kind of mitigate some of the stormwater. And we've provided sample calculations for determining the volume of stormwater that needs to be controlled as well.
Okay. All right, Lisa, so what are we back to? What is it that we need to do to move this along?
So I would like to see if the committee would be ready to determine what their recommendation will be to the full board in terms, again, of the threshold when this new ordinance would apply. So do we want to keep the ordinance as it's been drafted to this point? And again, then the threshold that's used is the creation of net additional impervious area of 200 square feet or greater. Or do you want to perhaps recommend something, we capture less improvements? You know, what we talked about in the past, kind of though, with just thinking that only applying this to large projects, and I feel like a broken record here, but we've talked about in the past, like maybe if you don't capture enough of the improvements that are going on, the smaller projects incrementally really start to catch up. And those could end up being some of more of the problematic issues that we have here in Brentwood. So that's just kind of what you have to balance and weigh out. And I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer, but it's whatever I think the committee feels is the best answer. And at least it's a starting point. That's the other thing. You know, we could always go back and revise that part of the ordinance later.
I think a couple of meetings ago, we pretty well shot down 200 square feet. I don't know why we're back to this point. I kind of thought it was heading towards projects that would go before ARB, but I could be, maybe I've forgotten. Andy?
Question, if I may. When you do the 200 square feet at where we're at right now, just for thing, if I do something that expands that 200 feet, is my calculations based on the 200 square feet improvement, or does my calculation have to do with all impervious surfaces in the yard that the work's being done in?
So Chrissie can help me out if I'm not interpreting this code correctly, but it would be for anytime someone would say, I'm going to make an improvement, and that particular improvement at that time would be greater than 200 square feet.
I understand.
Okay.
But the question is, when you want my calculations, is the calculations just on the 200 square feet that I'm improving? Or is it on the entire water flow on the property as it would exist with the improvements in place?
Yeah, that's a different question. So, Christie, do you want to go ahead and speak to that, please?
Yeah, the way that the ordinance was written is for the calculations would be for the improved or the additional impervious surfaces. So it wouldn't be for any of the existing that is already on the property. So we're not going back retroactive to have people control everything that's on their property. And then just to provide some additional clarification, Mr. Lockman, you're right. We talked about the ARB, but we also used the 200 square feet is kind of a minimum that requires the ARB for, so smaller than that wouldn't require that. So it's 200 and the ARB.
Yeah.
So we're excluding some of those smaller improvements.
Thank you. Andy?
Come back to my question again. So if I'm coming in with my 200 square foot added patio that I want to put in the backyard, you're going to get my calculations on what that 200 square foot impervious area may do with the water flow. But if I've already got an existing water flow problem, we can ignore that problem in particular and just stay with what the 200 square feet would do for me. And yet you would like the homeowner to pay, I think at one point we were talking a $300 or $500 per engineering evaluation fee. Am I reading the ordinance correctly?
That was the suggestion, yes, to cover the costs for the engineering review. But if it is a patio, that would be excluded because those don't go through the ARB.
Okay.
The other thing is we're focusing on the improvements that are being submitted for the permits. To go retroactive for all improvements on people's property, I think is maybe somewhat onersome. Now, if people do have existing problems, that may be something, to address, but the purpose of the ordinance is to look into the future and not to go retroactive for all problems that may or may not exist on properties at this time.
All right. So I guess I'm looking for to help move this along, a motion that any improvement greater than 200 square feet and goes before ARB would need to go before a professional engineer, and the fee would be charged. Nancy?
Well, may I ask, I want to make the motion, but may I ask a question before, since there's no motion on the floor yet? Okay. So it seems like a lot of the concern is about the fee that the city is charging. So if there were 14 projects in 2019 that came under this, is there a way to reduce the $500 fee and the city take some of that, or or are there thresholds for projects? Because a $500 fee on a $10,000 project is a pretty significant percentage. A $500 fee on a $400,000 project, they're probably still going to build a house. It's not going to stop somebody from building a house, but it might stop someone from doing a $10,000 addition. So I don't know how to fix that. If someone
like a sliding scale.
Yeah. I don't want to get it so complicated, but I don't want to make it onerous for people to improve their houses. But this water runoff is terrible, and we get in issue after issue. And now if the city doesn't fix this, then we have neighbors suing neighbors because of water runoff. And if we can help prevent some of that when we're, I feel like this could be really helpful in preventing long-term problems and a nuisance issues. People would, I personally would rather fix it when my yard's dug up than to get a nuisance violation and then have to go dig up my yard.
So the city will be receiving an OMCI fund next year. So we can indicate, and Dan can speak to this, we can indicate this in our plan to MSD that this is one of many stormwater related issues that the city will use this to pay for, in addition to, developing a stormwater master plan. So that's just an idea.
Brandon?
So Nancy, I kind of like your thought process. I mean, my concern with the 200 square feet is that you're putting a patio in and it literally costs a couple $100 and then you're gonna have to pay $500 for this. I mean, but those also cause rainwater issues, right? I mean, when people put it in, I mean, what's wrong with the sliding scale? I mean, you can make that pretty simple, right? You could just a percentage of total estimated cost or something like that.
Well, but a patio wouldn't go before ARB.
No, they wouldn't. But to the point of like something that was simpler.
No, I understand.
Front porch might go to ARB.
That's right. That's a good one.
Yeah. Andy?
If you went to a sliding scale, I would ask the city attorney, is that by using the sliding scale, the balance that isn't paid for by the homeowner would be paid for by the city? Is that using public funds on private property for improvements? And do we run into a state statute that says we can't do that? And I think the answer to that might be yes.
Sure. Well,
So Andy has a good point about improvements. I mean, maybe it wouldn't be because you're not actually doing an improvement, you're doing an analysis, but that is something that should be checked. But I mean, I kind of like that OMCI money. I mean, that's like blood money anyway, so we should be using it.
Well, I'd love to see the OMCI money to go in to put a stormwater arrangement down Lewis Avenue, because the back of their yards get flooded out every time we get anything over an inch of rain, because there is no collection point till it gets to Manchester Road. But that's a whole nother issue. When you ask developers to do these studies, we require the developer to put the money in the city's hands to pay for these bills up front. And I don't think you're going to see that's going to go over any better if they find out your residents are getting a cost break. So we may be opening a bigger can of worms there.
well, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Well, if we go the OMCI route, doesn't that have to, each one of those would have to be approved by MSD every time we submit them, or would it be like a fund?
No, the city will receive the fund, and so long as the use of those funds are for a number of items, stormwater related, erosion, I think it would qualify. I don't believe they would have to approve every single project, but we can ask Dan to clarify that. I don't believe they have to approve every single project.
Okay.
Well, that sounds like a great solution, and it might then, I mean, like if you were adding a patio, you would still have to do, I mean, like, next steps, if there's not a fee charge like that, if we wanted to add other projects to this long-term, because this is successful and we get good feedback, then it's a cost that isn't borne by the residents for smaller projects. I'm thinking way ahead. We got to get this passed first.
Well, I think we're going to have to find out if we can use those funds first.
Yeah.
Andy?
The other part of the question, though, Nancy, would be yes, I have the review fee for the engineer to look at what we're doing, but your homeowner incurs an additional blueprint and engineering thing that he has to come up with to submit with his project. So the fee does become much more expensive.
That's true. Excellent point. Yeah. We just all need backyards like yours.
It took me 15 years to get there.
There'd be no water runoff issues in our city.
All right. So
do you want to Mr. Chairman, would you like a motion, or do we want to find out information? Because I'll make a motion, but not if.
Well, let's make a motion and then make that part of the motion. Contingent.
So I move that we approve the proposal to implement stormwater ordinances that would apply to projects over 200 square feet and that have to go through ARB for review, and would direct staff to investigate whether OMCI funds can be used to pay the fee for the city to review the plans.
Do I have a second? All right. Andy, you look like you got a question.
The question being, this is going
to go on to the full board for discussion and approval. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Is that what you need, Lisa?
Yes, and then just to wrap up, then Christie gave an overview what was in the best management practice manual. I think that's going through just their last internal review at their office, and we should be receiving that soon. And so I would hope to get that distributed out to the committee here very shortly. So it'll give you time to look at that and become familiar with it.
Great. All in favor of Nancy's motion, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? All right. Anything else, Lisa?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to new business. And Dan, we've got an easement.
Yes, there's actually.
MSD project.
Yes. This is in particular to project number 11212, which is MSD's project along White, Rosalie, Bridgeport. What they propose on doing is there's combined sewer in some areas. So of course they need to separate that into separate storm and sanitary. And in order to do this project, part of it involves going down the alley to the east of the post office, which the city owns that alley. So to do this project, they plan on running some new pipes on Bridgeport, White. I included the 90% drawings in case anybody was interested. But basically, when they do that, they're going to need some temporary construction easement, TCE, and then they'll need some permanent sewer easements. And then there's also some other damages, like they'll have to add a ramp to the post office whenever they impact their loading dock. And then also whenever they would tear up any pavement, of course, they have to put that back. But I included the evaluations where they came up with their numbers. Interestingly enough, there's actually a 10-foot by 6-foot box culvert that runs past City Hall. There's an inlet near the corner of the building. It sweeps around, goes past the library, and then underneath Eulalie near the fire department. But in order for them to do all this work, they're asking to use our property, for an easement. We'll still maintain ownership, and they're offering, gotta find it in the finance. Here it is. Yeah, almost $40,000 for those 3 parcels. So it's $39,645 is the settlement amount. I wrote in the memo that this money could be used. We could put it back towards Fund 50 Stormwater and use that for future stormwater expenses. Some of these runoff issues, we could use it for that. I wasn't sure if you wanted to accept the first offer, if you wanted to offer a counter offer, or we just say that we would, accept their first offer, and we would need to prepare the different. I believe we could probably do a resolution, but I'd talk to Kevin. We would prepare everything for the board, not for this meeting, but the July meeting. We could get that prepared.
Do you have any experience with handling these type of easements? I mean, do you get into a negotiation, or you just pretty much roll with this?
I worked for a water company years ago, and you know, sometimes people would take the first offer, sometimes they would want more money. It just depends, you know, if they thought that, well, sometimes you would even offer like free service, not service, but free taps, you know, where people didn't have a water main and you were doing a main extension. But in this case, we already have sewer. I don't know what else we would need if we would just want the money, or if there's something associated with one of our other projects like Brentwood bound that we need help with.
Andy? I can't hear you. You're muted.
No, okay. In granting the easement for them to use all Asphalt to dig it up and put their pipes in and stuff, what's the requirement for replacing the surface back to the original condition and line markings of spaces and stuff if we need it? Is that in this 39,000?
It would be within their project scope. They would have to put back, you know, the alley to the specifications that we include in there. Same thing. I know that part of this project would actually disrupt our parking lot, so that would have to be saw cut. They'd have to put back the proper depth of asphalt, whatever we want to work with them, put in the spec.
Brandon?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of of the mind that we don't even charge them, because this is ultimately our taxpayers that are paying MSD anyway. But due to the fact that we may have to repair some stuff, I would make a motion to accept their first offer and just move on.
Your second?
I'll second.
All right. Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
One opposed? All right. Finally, we get to the chicken ordinance. All right, I don't know, what are we doing with this? Brandon, you want to run with this?
Yeah, let me start it off. And so, I mean, I appreciate the residents that came in. I mean, having read the ordinance myself, and Lisa, I appreciate you sending that over and highlighting. I think there's some ambiguity in here about whether chickens have to be kept in the coop at all times. I don't think there's any ambiguity if they have to have a coop and the size of them. I've had neighbors that have had chickens, and I've watched them run around in their backyard, and it hasn't been an issue at all. So I'm of the opinion that if it's unclear and people are getting cited somehow for being in violation of the ordinance for letting chickens run around in their fenced-in backyard, then we need to clarify the ordinance, and we shouldn't have that interpretation. I also appreciate the residents saying that, you know, they do it usually under supervision because the hawks and things like that. So I don't think we have to be overly restrictive of like, you have to be monitoring them, because I don't think people would plan to leave them out, because the chickens wouldn't be around much longer if you just left them out there all the time.
Andy?
Make a motion to change the sentence to allow that the chickens can have free run of a fenced-in backyard. Add the sentence to the ordinance and you solve the problem.
Second.
Okay, any other discussion? Lisa, do you want to chime in at all?
Sure. So the ordinance was developed back in 2013. And just to give you a little bit of background, there's been 14 chicken permits that have been issued since that time. I don't think all 14 residents are still in the chicken business right now, but there's still a fair number. By and large, since I've been here 4+ years ago, this really hasn't come up. We really haven't had too much in the way of complaints with anyone who does have chickens. I also actually I was a person that worked on this ordinance for Brentwood back in 2013. I was just here just as a part-time person doing some work on retainers. So for me, and again, I know in the interest of time, I'll make this short, but I really do think what the intent of the ordinance was more what the people were saying tonight. The one word that probably needs to be striked in this ordinance is, again, that and it's been brought up, that the chickens shall be adequately confined within the coop. So it does probably, most people would interpret that then that they can't, you know, run loose. But I think, again, the intent of the ordinance is that the coop and the pen that is definitely required provides an adequate shelter for the chickens, So actually, I also think you could maybe just strike the word confined and put sheltered, and it would probably fix the ordinance too. Because it was intended that the only reason really to revoke then a chicken permit would be in the cases where they're not confined to the backyard and you find the chickens loose on someone else's property in right of way. So I think too, there's just, there's probably a little bit of wordsmithing, but if that's still really what the committee sees was the intent of the ordinance, I think we can come up with something relatively in a simple manner, even with what Alderman Leahy said tonight, I think would work as well. So,
Andy?
In doing this adjustment to this ordinance, can we also ask the board to void any current citations?
So I can speak to that. We have not gone any further with code enforcement in terms of these complaints. Again, I think we first heard about this in May, and you're right, there's probably some wordsmithing that needs to happen with the ordinance if there were 3 people in our office that kind of all looked at it a little bit differently. So the interpretation could certainly be clear. And so as it would stand right now, I don't think that there is any pressing need to move forward with any type of code enforcement activity at this time.
And I guess for surrounding neighbors, there's always the nuisance laws to fall back on.
Yes, yep, for noise and arrangement of that nature or free running.
Okay.
The other question is could this be available for the Monday night meeting on the 15th, or is that too fast?
I believe we may have already taken care of that, but I'll refer to the city administrator.
It can be on the agenda. It's not on there right now.
Oh, okay.
If we could please add it to the agenda.
Okay. Any other questions or comments before we vote? All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. Well, that brings us to our second citizen comment. And Shelley, do we have anybody left?
Angie, did you want to speak? I see you're unmuted.
No. What I
don't see any hands raised.
Okay. Well then.
Let's see. Oh, just let me check.
If not, you can always email your alderman if there's anything else. Nobody? All right, entertain.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion for the Public Works Committee to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, I'm done.